Hey there, welcome back to the show. Now, whether you like it or not, we have a name now. We are the Lit Heads. I don't care what you think about it, it's my show. So, what are we doing today? We're going to review a book. One of those gives you the best book ever feeling. Have you ever had that? Now, when you have it multiple times, do you really know which the best book is out of all the ones that give you that feeling? No. No. You just know that you get it when you get it. Every time you do. Yeah, so this one's wonderful. This is Fitzpatrick's War by Theodore Judson. You probably never heard of it. I'd be surprised you had. But check out this beautiful cover. It's a hardcover. The back side. The spine. Beautiful. Wonderful. And look at this too. It was only $7. Now, I was quite lucky to find this. I actually found two of them. This one was a little better condition. But yeah, big old hardcover, and I found it in an old used bookstore. Now, like me, this guy, Theodore Judson, he decided to screw those publishing houses. I'm going to publish it myself, but he did in 2004 when there was no Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing. He used what you call a vanity publisher. So you basically pay them to print your book and you're an author. Yay you. But there's like no marketing to it. So this one's a real hidden gem. I heard about it watching a video called Mouse Utopia. I'm going to put the link, if not. There you go. Well, what Rudyard thought was interesting about Fitzpatrick's War is that Theodore Judson, our author here, seemed to implicitly understand what was going on in the experiment. I suppose I better give a quick background on what it was that happened. Now, imagine we have a colony of rats, and instead of having to find food all the time, instead of having to stay in a certain living space, Lebensraum, instead of having predators, they're in supposedly optimal conditions where they're taken care of, they're fed as much as they want, they have enough space for a lot of mice or rats or whatever they are, just rodents in general. They have a assistant clean out the poop. Anything you would think a mouse, rodent, any kind of rodent would want is provided for. And what happened? It's quite startling. What happened is that after the initial population boom, for some reason the social structure of the mice completely collapses. You have pretty boys just grooming themselves all day. They stay alone all the time. They do nothing but preen themselves. You have the alpha males, and they're fighting all the time. They get to the point where they don't even care if it's a man or a woman. And you also have, the females they lose the maternal instinct. They don't nest, they don't clean out the nest, and they don't stick around the baby like they normally would. And this makes dysfunctional generations of the mice that actually are born. And then there's also a group of marauders, raiders, and all they want to do is kill anyone who is acting normally. And what happens in Fitzpatrick's War, at least the historical backdrop to it, that is the alternate future that you get out of our world, modern day America and whatnot, is that this functional group of people is able to survive and take over the dysfunctional groups of people, which are, as I mentioned, the hedonists and the marauders, which the government of the United States is taken over by these marauders. Eventually, the Yukons fight a civil war against the American government, kill the charlatan psychopath in charge, and they're in charge of America now, while Europe has been taken over by the Turks. The point of the setting is a American paleoconservative dream. Everyone's not only a Christian, but they have Puritan moral values. In fact, the three things they consider important in life are work, worship, and war. I don't think the Puritans believed in war, but the Yukons do. They don't have sex before marriage. They read the Bible. They don't get married until they're 25. They don't mess around. Most of the boys go into the military. The girls make dresses. They have tea parties, and they gossip about the guys they like. They gossip about the girls they don't like, and they're actively involved in their husbands' careers, and they actually go on campaigns with the men, and they basically make their home away wherever they are. There's a scene where they are stationed in India, and they're all wearing the local Indian folk dresses. They do the same thing in Mali. That's pretty cool, isn't it? There's nothing like that in the military I was in. Now again, this setting is just the backdrop to the book, and it's a lot of what makes the book interesting. As I've said, it's a bit of a fantasy for you paleo-conservatives around there to actually study the Bible in school, have a rigorous humanities curriculum where you're supposed to learn Greek, Hebrew, and Latin in addition to English. It's so much different than what we have today. Now, of course, they still feel like, oh, that's so pointless. I'm never going to use that. But that's just one of the things they do. Whether it's a little disappointing or not, you don't get an answer to, well, what can we do to avoid our own civilization going down in flames like it did in this book? No, it's more concerned about what's going on in the book. Hence the name Fitzpatrick's War. Fitzpatrick is born with all the stars aligned. He's extremely intelligent, a total prodigy. He can articulately speak about pretty much anything to anyone, especially military history. Now, he could talk about dresses with somebody, with a girl. He could talk about the weather. He could talk about Homer. He could talk about Napoleon. He could talk about current tactics, current weapons. He could talk about anything with anyone. He's that kind of guy. He's extremely charismatic. What else is he? He was born 6'5", so he's extremely handsome. So he's got a commanding figure. What else has Fitzpatrick got going for him? He's the son of the consul of the Yukon Confederation, and therefore he's the son of the most powerful man in the world. And what is he going to be after this? He's going to be Alexander the Great, if he at all darn well can. And what's this going to lead to? You'll see. I've talked a little bit about the idea of conservatism, but that's not quite just what we have here. Another idea we get here in Fitzpatrick's War is the idea of rigorism, and this is built into the Puritan lifestyle that the Yukons have, at least the commoners do. You're going to see in the book that the nobles have a different kind of life that's much more extravagant and decadent. But if your life is work, war, and worship, is that an easy life? It requires a lot of dedication. The Bible has really high standards for people. In fact, they're so high that you can't meet them. It's built into it. And if you're trying your hardest to live a virtuous life, a sinless life in honor of God, work is self-explanatory. But that's your life. And three things: you're going to get married until you're 25. And they take that seriously. If you aren't a virgin, you're damaged goods, boy or girl. Now, the nobles don't care about this as much. They're more into the, casual stuff, just because that's what they do. But commoners, they take it seriously. And if you're a man, you're probably going to get married. Why? Because a lot of the men die in war or in work accidents or whatever men do. And the women, they actually kind of compete for guys. Now, romantic marriages are preferred, but they do arrange marriages at times. And, That's what their life is like. It's rigorous. The girls, they don't wear the nasty stuff. They aren't showing off their bodies except to the guys they like. Yeah. And they don't have, as I mentioned, they don't have electricity. One of the things that they decided to do, not only to defeat America, the Yukons invented something called storm machines, which are able to create inclement weather, and they are able to disrupt electricity so that it doesn't work anymore. So they ain't on TikTok. They aren't watching TV. There's in fact a funny part of the book where one of the characters is saying, "Well, there's no way the Americans were as bad as they were. The Yukons hate the Americans. They fought a whole war against them. They think they're total degenerates. They couldn't have been that bad. It's propaganda." And the conversation is about how much of a role television had within our society today, American society, which of course the reader knows all about. And this character is saying there's no way every American household had a television in the living room and the children could watch whatever they wanted on it. That would have been so unmanageable. There's no way they would have done that. They held the family in high esteem. There's no culture in the world that didn't. And meanwhile, we're here as Americans thinking, oh my God, we are that bad. We're worse. Because it was written in 2004, and now you got kids is just, they got iPads, and they can find whatever the heck they can find on the internet. And the internet is a dark and scary place. It's got scary people, and it's got, you know what's on the internet? I shouldn't have to tell you, because either you already know or you're fortunate enough not to. Enough said. Yeah, Theodore Judson, our author here, he really goes hard on us today. I want to read to you one of the passages that I found. Not only great, but I thought it was very funny. Now, if you're going to make someone laugh in the book, that is talent. You've got to have the reader very interested in what they're reading to be paying enough attention. And you got to be snappy. You got to give them something quite ironic and something piercing to the point. And it's going to come right out at them. And they're like, oh my goodness, this is great. Yeah, laugh out loud here. All right, here we go. Now, a little bit of an introduction. They're doing an oral history exam where the different characters were assigned, well, randomly given a certain era of history to, well, like a century. Say the 3rd century, where you're supposed to, all right, 3rd century BC, and you're supposed to recount different writings by the Greeks, the Romans, and hard enough in Greek and Latin, because that's what they were speaking there. And you better recite back in Greek and Latin, because that shows you know what you're talking about, because they expect you to read it in Greek and Latin. Because this is a rigorous humanities course, like we should have. Yeah, so that's what's going on. Let's get into it. I could not believe my good fortune. I had been given the easiest period of the 25. I had to caution myself not to give a shout of joy as I stood upright. Sir Robert, said Mannheim, there is a vulgar name for the 20th and 21st centuries. I am certain you have both read and heard it. Would you please state that vulgar name for us now? Sir, do you think that would be proper, sir? There are no ladies or children present, he said. We are in a military college. You have all heard dirty language before. Please say the name. This time is called the Age of Shit, sir. Correct, he said, and he smashed his stick on the podium when someone behind me snickered. The Age of Shit, he repeated, as though saying the phrase again would silence any sophomoric laughter. The prevalent culture of that era is called the culture of shit. Now, what is the polite name for that era? The Age of Electricity, sir? Yes, that's right. We live in the era of shit. And if this is not self-explanatory by, listening to the top 40, those pop hits and those those mumble rappers and the freaking snare drum beats all the time in every song, it's explained by the fact that pretty much anything that comes out nowadays, whether literature or nonfiction, or especially histories, are full of ideology. I mean, can you go through a recently published biography of, say, Thomas Jefferson without them going about his positions on slavery in minute detail and analyzing whether or not he slept with, what was her name, Sally Hemings or not? I don't think he did. In 2004, this wasn't as obvious as it is now. In 2004, I kind of would have thought the Yukons were a real thing. How disappointing that they're not as much as they are. I mean, I found a community of people kind of like that online, but there's a long way to go, and Judson knew that. That's why he didn't have the Yukon Confederacy American War, Civil War thing go on until the 2080s. There was a lot of degeneration that it took in between. I would just tell you right now that there's a rather unorthodox method of storytelling here. Now, Fitzpatrick's War is a book written by the character we were just in the history examination explaining what the age of shit was. He's a guy who's a commoner, joined the military at the age of 16 and fought against the Mexicans, and for saving a few people in a burning tank, he was made a Knight of the Field, which is an uncommon achievement, and it gets him into the Yukon War College, where Fitzpatrick, as I introduced, going to school with all his best friends, who are usually nobles, the Basili. So this book is the autobiography of Sir Robert Mayfair Bruce. The Fitzpatrick's War book in the canon wasn't published until 100 or so years later, and it's a very controversial document. It's so controversial that there's a series of footnotes, let's see if I can find any, that are made by a historian of that time who vehemently disagrees with not everything. He will concede where Bruce is unquestionably right about something, but almost everything that has to do with Fitzpatrick or the certain people he likes, he goes after Bruce for. And he goes after his personal habits too, and tries to point out he's a degenerate. And that's up for you to judge. I think, honestly, Judson could have done a better job of making him a more robust critic. But that's not what he does, and otherwise it's a pretty interesting way of going at something. In fact, I also did the same thing in my own book, Edelweiss, where it's a story of a father telling his son of an adventure he went on back in his youth. So the similarity between the two is that the ending is already partly known. You just don't know the details of how it happens. And you also have two different perspectives that you're seeing the story from. This, of course, in Fitzpatrick's War is Sir Robert Mayfair Bruce narrating things from his point of view in the moment as an autobiography. And you also have this historian who is taking snipes at him from 100 years later and what he knows as a historian of that time, or thinks he knows, which he may or may not be right in certain parts. But in Edelweiss, you have Florian's perspective. Florian is the son, and you have Adel, who is the father, and they don't completely agree on everything either. Though it's a bit more harmonious. Now, where was I going with this? History. Now, that's another theme we're getting into with Fitzpatrick's War, history, that most noble of sciences. It's held in very high esteem in Yukon society. Now, the Yukons have the example of as many societies as they care about to look at as examples of what to do and what not to do. They have the example of the Romans, they have the example of the Greeks. What happened that made them go from, say, their beginnings in a very small part of Italy, Rome itself, which wasn't built in a day. It was built in centuries. This little people under the boot of the Etruscans, throwing them off, and then expanding throughout Italy and becoming a power that rivals Carthage. Why do they beat Carthage? They'll look at this a little bit, and then they'll become the Roman Empire. How does that happen? That happens through Caesar. How do they fall down? They fall to the Huns. They fall to the Germans. They fall to everybody in the East wanted a piece of their land. They fall to a load of things, including themselves, including a new upcoming religion. They also have our example. What happened to the Americans that made them go down? And how are we going to prevent that? That's one of the big questions of the book. And you do get an answer by the end of it. And the answer is part of why this book is a work of science fiction. You could say it's just speculative history. You could just say it's a steampunk story. You could just say, oh well, it's what do you call it? But yeah, you're actually going to use technology technology and an understanding of history to figure out how not to go down, how to always stay in that stage where you are going west, young man, how you're always a young society, how you're always the Roman Republic, how you're always vital, how you're always rigorous. You always have a life where you aren't just kicking back, swiping on Tinder, filling your brain full of dopamine without any, sense of reward and any sense of stakes, just getting whatever you taking the freaking blue pill. This is how are we going to keep ourselves red pilled as a society? How are we going to socially engineer things to be good, but not in a sort of it's fair for everybody, it's sort of feminized, woke, just comfort addicted way. It's the opposite. And is that a good thing? We'll see. You'll see how they get there. And it's a hell of a journey. I've already talked about Fitzpatrick a little bit, but what do you do if you are cursed to greatness? What is that like? What if you have a group of guys and they're the Basileis. So Alexander the Great had an entourage of companions that were his right-hand men. They grew up with him. They were his best friends. And Fitzpatrick has a group like that because in everything he has to emulate Alexander the Great because that's who he has to be, okay? He has to actually outdo Alexander the Great. And how are you going to do that? Well, most of these guys are spoiled brats. They're nobles. They're full of themselves. They have either one talent or one of them conspicuously has no talents. And what do they want out of life? Well, they think Fitzpatrick is great, and they think they're great. They're born into greatness. They're just sorted into greatness by being around Fitzpatrick and being a Yukon, and they're just on a wonderful destiny, and they want to keep going with that. And it turns them into crappy people. Not all of them are like this, though. Bruce, as I mentioned, isn't a noble. Find out how he even meets Fitzpatrick, because it's a little bit interesting. And he's not the only one like that either. His bodyguard's a decent guy, and there's another one that's also a commoner, but is further along in his career. than Bruce is, and it's touching the difference between these two classes of people, and that's something that the novel explores, how these Puritan commoners and power-mad nobles are different from one another. That's something that this book will explore quite extensively. It's a bit of an escapist thing to think about, well, how would this other society work? And as I said, with the other books, it's quite immersive, that you're really getting into this this imagined era of time, and it all really fits together. There's only a few things that I'd say, wow, come on now. There's no way that happened. So that's good. That's really how you make a world. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the women in this book. Now, Fitzpatrick's not a woman. Sir Robert Mayfair Bruce isn't a woman. The historian isn't a woman. None of the bacilli are women. But undeniably, the women in this book have a place, and they have a load of influence, especially on Fitzpatrick himself. He's a total mama's boy. So one of the key criticisms that the historian, I don't even remember his name, has of Bruce, who's our point of view character, is that he is a simp. He's manipulated by his wife. And as Puritans, patriarchal society, no doubt, it's a label, but it works. It's not manly to be under the thumb of your wife, or even almost to listen to her, but everybody does. And Bruce might do it a little more than is reasonable. Alright, so you might have too much, you might have too little, and Bruce is on, this is a too much side, so he's over here, way over here, way over here. And his wife's very strong-willed, and she's, to be honest, she's the conscience of him. He might have ended up being a lot more ambitious than he was. He might have ended up being a lot more callous than he was. He might have ended up being a lot more conformist than he was to the values of this Yukon culture that's totally disciplinarian, that's Puritan, that's kind of brutal. And she keeps the Christian conscience into this man through her influence, and it gets him into trouble. It gets him into total trouble. But that's what he does, and he makes it through. And at the end of the book, in fact, in the beginning, he declares that his wife was one of the best things that happened to him in his life. It's one of the most she's one of the things that, if not one of the only things that he got joy out of. Yeah, and he's able to say this at the beginning of the book, and it's clear to you by the end. That's great. It's great. Let's think a little bit about what the future could hold. Now, we got a world where pretty much everybody has a cell phone. Everybody used to have a TV. They just upgraded to the cell phones, which are kind of like portable TVs, phones, and computers all in one thing. I'm trying to get away from this sort of thing, but a lot of people has in their grasp, and you don't even realize how much you are addicted to dopamine, all right? Every time you go into the car, you hit the radio, turn it on, you hear those songs, they sound so catchy, so nice, and what happened if you just completely stopped? What would life be like? Would you enjoy it at all? And that might happen if the world completely shuts down and goes down. Are you going to still have the will to live, or are you going to be like one of those mice in the Mouse Utopia that, what are you going to do? Yeah. Are you still going to want to go and get some food? Or is everybody else going to be in the same situation and they're going to be murderers? What if you aren't able to get food anymore? The people who do produce the food are going to become a lot more powerful, which is what happened to the Yukons. They were the ones who produced the food, who still had farms and still could grow crops. They had to mess that up, so that's how part of how the Yukons became a bigger, more influential group. Oh, did I mention? In all the Mouse Utopia experiments, all of the mice die. Nobody survives. Having a group that's the same people, the Yukons, is actually, it doesn't happen. The Marauders kill them all. They can't functionally mate and form good relationships. They can't train their young. And they just go nuts and nuttier until their society falls apart. Their social structure goes down and they all die. Because they all either don't want to live or they want to kill everyone else, and they can't make it anything. All they can do is destroy now. They hate themselves. They hate everyone else. They're surrounded by enemies if they're trying to do the right thing. If they even can. They have to find out how. Because they're damaged. They weren't raised right. They're not in a natural environment. They have everything given to them. So what do they have to do? They, as I say, they groom themselves, they're sex crazy, or they're murder crazy. Narcissism, murder, or just constant orgy. And that's not how creatures are meant to live. How far are we, my friends, from the cowboys? Now, we might be in Texas, in beautiful Lubbock, West Texas, where they shoot the cowboy movies, but how many cowboys do you really get? You just got college students, you got people who work jobs, those construction workers, they're probably as close as you get in the city. You got your farmers, although they're going around on a horse, they got a tractor. They got it all automated, and that's great. They are real cowboys. They got those boots and they use them. They can maybe dance and probably do great on the online dating, but nah, man. What do you have? What do you have? You have air conditioning. You don't even build your house oriented to the wind so you get a good breeze out like they did in those dugouts back in the 19th century. You got beds. When's the last time you didn't sleep in your bed or at a hotel? There's probably a couch. Maybe there's a sleeping bag. Do you dare take a cold shower, or you crank that thing up? You even go working out? I hope you do, because that's what we can do to fight against the degeneration. I'm trying. I hope you are too, because we really live in a Mouse Utopia world. You can go to the grocery store for your food. Everybody does that in the same place. You live in, hopefully you live with some people, but if you just don't know anyone where you live, you probably live in some freaking cubicle like I do. And, what else? What are the other aspects of Mouse Utopia? It cleans up. Yeah, it's usually somebody's job to clean up. You have the garbage men. You pay them. It's rolled into your bills. You have sewage. Yeah, all the water just goes down in there. You don't have to worry about it. It usually doesn't pull up unless you have bad infrastructure. What else? The roads. People fix the roads. People keep the grocery stores and all the other stores stocked, so you pretty much have everything you need. You just have to go do a job. You just have to sign up for the welfare. You just have to write your mommy. Yeah. That's where we live, and I don't know how we get back there. That's a topic for another book. Now, I know people have their ideas about it, or their It's not happening. It's not happening. I'm just gonna go play the video games and forget about it. Yeah. Heavy stuff today. But, well, if you are so bold enough to think about the gaping abyss opening up in history, I welcome you to read Fitzpatrick's War. Now, it's a story. It's not real life, but I'd say it's one of those that are worthwhile. Whether you agree with it or not, I'd say go for it. Fitzpatrick's War, if you can at all find one, they're ridiculously expensive online, but you might as well look anywhere you can. The library, they didn't have one at the library. They might have one at the library. Used bookstores. I had the first one I checked. That's the one I found 2 in, and yeah, just keep looking. It's worth looking for. I guarantee you, this is a good book. Fitzpatrick's War. All right, now have a good one, y'all, and vote for Taylor Swift for president 2024.